All right, folks, welcome to our episode extras. I am thrilled and excited today to be joined by our first guest, Joan Sullivan, who is not only a fascinating person and figure in education, but also someone I've had the privilege and benefit of working with for, I think, 10 years or more now.
15.
Has it been that long?
Time.
Okay, I'm losing track of time. The mind is the first thing to go, I hear. But Joan and I go way back to our time together in New York City. And I don't know, Joan, if you remember what happened when you hired me to be a teacher at Bronx Academy of Letters. Do you have any recollection of how that went down?
Well, I remember patting myself on the back because I got a great teacher.
So how that actually went down is somehow I had gotten the message for the final interview that we were going to talk on the phone. And I think you thought I was coming to the school. So I was on my way home and I stopped at the Dunkin' Donuts on 125th Street and Lenox in Harlem. And I was waiting by my cell phone, waiting for your call, and you didn't call, and then I called the school, and they put me through to you, and you were like, "Where are you?" And I was like, "What do you mean, where am I? I'm on the phone," not being a very wise 26-year-old or whatever at the time, and you were like, "You're supposed to be here," and I had a moment of panic, like, I guess I'm not getting this job then, but apparently. It worked out, and here we are.
So did you come?
No. I mean, I was.
We did it by phone.
We did it by phone.
Okay.
Yeah, we did it by phone. But I thought for a moment there, like I ruined that one. So, so thank you so much for joining us, Joan. And I'd love to start off with a question that's really about you and your kind of personal journey. You have a fascinating story. You are the youngest of 10 children. 8 of whom are educators in one form or another, including yourself. So that's a high percentage in the family. So why are you an educator?
Why am I an educator? I was always interested in questions of social justice, and I went to a public school system in Princeton. And that's one of the wealthier districts in the country. And right adjacent to it was Trenton Public School System, which was embedded in the state capital. One of the only state capital at the time, as far as I knew, didn't have a hotel. So it was real urban decay, and there had been a lot of wealth in Trenton. Anyway, it was a tale of two cities, and for a variety of reasons, I came into contact with that contrast pretty early on, which I learned was a result, among other reasons, of the fact that in New Jersey, they were still funding schools by local property taxes. And so the relative allocation of money was egregiously off. And so that seemed like a powerful entry point into the social justice issues that I was interested in.
Okay. And so among the flock of 8 educators, would you say similar story for many of your siblings as well, or? No.
I have several siblings in higher education, so it was more of the academic interest. I have a sister who's an art historian, for example. I have several sisters who are writers. But I also have a brother who teaches in elementary schools, and I think is there for a similar reason, but probably more exclusively compelled by just a love of children. So for me, it's more of a balance. And I have a sister who taught philosophy at Harvard and was just too shy to endure the sort of adult stares and the pressure of being in front of a room of adults, and ended up teaching Montessori school to 3 to 5 year olds. And for her, it was just comfort with that age group. So I guess for a variety of reasons.
Yeah. Well, so as I said, you and I first started working together in New York City, which is the largest district in the country, and now for the last 4 years have been working together here in Los Angeles, which is the second largest school system in the country. So that's a lot of large bureaucracies. What draws you to want to work in big complex systems?
I guess that, as with most things, there are a variety of reasons, but probably the most prominent among those is that that's where the greatest opportunities lie for us to ensure more equal access to quality education. It's these big systems that are serving the lion's share of our nation's school children. It's these big systems that tend to have the most persistent opportunity and achievement gaps. It's these big systems that are struggling on so many fronts to ensure equity of access. And it's these big systems that have trouble attracting the kind of talent that we need to solve these problems, because a lot of people flee the big systems because that bureaucracy is so weighty, because the alternatives to the big systems are appealing because of the innovation and nimbleness and independence that they offer. And yet most of our children go to school in these systems. And so from my perspective, we need to ensure that not only our resources and efforts to improve happening in that context, but we're also directing our human talent to the large systems.
Yeah. And so as we mentioned earlier in the episode, Joan is the CEO of the Partnership for Los Angeles Schools. Partnership is one of the nation's largest and most unique school transformation organizations working directly in districts. So, regular public schools and with the public school district, which is fairly unique nationally. So a major part of your role is fundraising and helping to bring resources to the organization. The partnership is 100% philanthropically funded, so every photocopy, every doorknob, does not come from state funding. So we also work in this profession where most of the additional resources, or certainly a large share of them from philanthropy, tend to flow into charter schools instead of district schools. So how do you make the case to philanthropists, to donors of various sorts, that investing in our traditional public schools is the right way to go?
Yeah, I hadn't thought about the fact we were paying for doorknobs, but we are, huh? So
paper clips,
all of it,
brooms.
Honestly, I have not historically thought that I'd end up in sort of the world of development, right? And that is, when you're running a nonprofit organization, a big part of your charge is to raise funds. And I didn't think necessarily that it would be a particularly appealing aspect of the work. But the fact is that we need to be ambassadors for our public schools in a whole variety of ways. And when I am fundraising, I feel like I'm making the case for our schools. And one thing that, and maybe this is a little bit of a digression, but I think it's been interesting to discover about the work of fundraising and development is that you're not asking for favors, right? You are giving people an opportunity to have a meaningful point of intersection with their communities. It is something that for them should be viewed, and is viewed really, as an opportunity, as a gift, right, to them, not vice versa. I mean, there is obviously reciprocal nature to it, but you're not asking for a favor. You're giving people an opportunity to engage with their community, and that's where the meaning comes from in life. And so I think starting with that perspective is an important part of being an effective fundraiser, right? You're not begging, you are offering. The other thing that I'd say about why large urban systems versus, say, a charter or an advocacy group or a policy group or a private school, first of all, a lot of funders are both persuaded and tempted to invest where there's already strong proof points of success in institutions that are already thriving, in our museums, in our institutions of higher education. And it's my belief that we need to redirect our attention to the institutions that are not yet thriving, because our country is only as strong as the system of schools that we have to offer, as the health of the broader population. And so there is that perspective, like going at the super macro level, right? How do we ensure that some of our resources, our philanthropic resources, are being directed to where the need is greatest? And while that on some level is intuitive, it's not what typically happens, right? These huge $100 million gifts are going to Stanford and Harvard. They're not going to large urban school systems. And that's a lost opportunity. It's also just not the right way to make sure that our society is thriving. And then sort of zooming in a little bit, if you're interested specifically in education, and lots of philanthropists are, and if you're interested in bridging gaps, opportunity gaps, achievement gaps, and you're investing in isolated efforts that exist outside of districts, you're missing the majority of our nation's school children who are going to school in the public school context. And that too is where the kids with highest needs are. Our students who are coming out of the justice system, our students who are homeless, our foster youth, the majority of our new arrivals who are just learning English. Those are students who live in those large urban districts and in other districts across the country. And so if you want an opportunity to reach those students, then you have to work within the context of the public school system. That doesn't mean we have to abandon some of these other efforts, but it means that the majority of our efforts should be focused on reaching the kids in that larger system. And the fact is that after 25 years of charter growth, the vast majority of our kids still go to district schools. And so even if that is a good strategy, you still have to figure out how to meet the needs of those students. And in LA, we're talking about over 500,000 children.
Yeah. So I do want to back up for 1 second and make sure I didn't get you into any trouble with our donors, Joan. So just to be clear, almost all of that money that you raise pays for people and supports for our schools and not doorknobs and paper clips. But something that I think is really fascinating about you is you're one of the few people that I'm aware of who has very intimate knowledge and perspective on kind of all levels, maybe outside of the federal government, but you've worked, you've been a teacher, you've been a principal, you've been deputy mayor of education for Los Angeles, and seen, LAUSD, I guess that's technically a city and local level, but it's a bigger school system than a lot of whole states. And you now with the partnership have been in the sort of school operator, school manager space. So I think you know a lot about education from a lot of different angles. What's something that you maybe wish that more people knew about how education works that might be helpful to folks?
Well, first I'll add that I was also a public school student and I am a public school parent. I have 3 fierce girls who are current or future LA Unified students. And so that too has been enriching, both to be a public school student, but even more to be a public school parent, because it gives you a whole new perspective on things. I guess it's less, in answering your question, it's less what I wish people knew than maybe offering a different perspective. I feel like we need a broader investment in the idea, the importance directly in public education, right? And part of the reason I think people flee our schools is because, well, people are interested in the well-being of their own children, which makes perfect sense. But I also think that what's happening is that we, especially if we have some privilege, whatever level it may be, we want to perpetuate that privilege for our children. And so we're thinking about how to amass more privilege, whether we know it or not, right? By sending our kids to the better public school or the private school and getting them the tutors and And so a lot of times it's actually a trade-off, right? You're saying, well, I want to make sure my kid gets the very best education and has access to the very best institutions of higher education. By the way, I went to Yale, but I wouldn't want my daughters to go there at this point, and that's a different conversation. But you're trying to in some way preserve privilege for your children, but at what expense? And I'm not even talking about for the public good. I'm talking about for your own children. And I think what we really should be seeking is the ability for our kids to embrace and to be fulfilled by and love a diverse community of people where they can interact across all sorts of lines of difference and derive richness and satisfaction and love from that. And I worry that in isolating our students, that our own children, that we're depriving them of that more fundamental sort of richness of life, right? It's not in the end the thing that's going to make them happy is not going to Yale. I mean, obviously to some extent the priority is to getting our kids in middle class jobs, but to another extent the priority is to ensure that we have happy, well-rounded people, and that comes from being embedded in communities that aren't totally curated.
Yeah. Fascinating perspective. And I want to end, Joan, with just a quick, uplifting final question. What inspires you most in the work that you do?
Well, I mean, the obvious answer is students, and I can think of so many students who are inspiring. The other day, speaking of funders, I was meeting with a foundation at one of our schools in Watts, and we had a panel of 3 students, all of whom were amazing. One of whom stood out because she was a 12-year-old at Markham Middle School who had her own clothesline. And she had a logo, she had a brand, she had products, and that was just one of her many passions and something that she had done without a lot of financial support and with a lot of creativity and talent, and had put that to work at that young age to launch a brand that was focused on athletics for girls, no less. So it was totally exciting and inspiring. But there are so many other students like that in our schools, and I often think about Jordan High School in Watts that had Florence Griffith Joyner, 5-time gold medalist, graduate from there, that had Glenn Seaborg, winner of the Nobel Prize in Chemistry, and Charles Mingus, jazz icon, all graduates of Jordan High School. And it is symbolic and emblematic, I guess, of the talent that lives in our schools, but often lies buried in a broken system. And so when I think of what inspires me, it's the opportunity to access the talent of the students who are inhabiting our schools and who could be coming back to our communities and teaching us so much, but they just need the opportunity to thrive.
All right. Well, Joan, thank you so much for joining us today for our seminar discussion and for sticking around for this chat as well. And folks, as always, you can find all of our content at our website, which is aotashow.com. That's aotashow.com. We'll see you next time.